There are lots of other lessons that have come out of the crisis. Let me just mention one more, because I think it's sort of interesting. Even after the bubble broke, the housing bubble broke in 2007, early 2008, Bernanke was asked, are you worried about the breaking of the bubble for the American economy? And he said, no, the risks are contained. And the forecast was obviously wrong. But the question was, why did he feel so confident? Well, the standard models in economics had talked about the virtues of diversification. And they had the risks, or toxic mortgages, have been spread all over the world. When I talk, give talks in Europe, I often thank the audience because they bought 40% of our toxic mortgages. And if they hadn't done that, the crisis in the United States would have been much worse. But sending the toxic mortgages abroad may have helped the United States, but actually didn't contain the risk. What it did is actually spread the risk. It led to contagion. And there's an interesting metaphor here. When you use the word contagion, which is what economists use to describe this process of how a downturn, a crisis in one country can cause a crisis in others, it's a metaphor taken from epidemiology, from the spread of disease. If you think about a disease, how do you respond to a disease? If the problem were given to economists, what they would say, diversify. So you have a group of people with smallpox, and the economist's recommendation would be to diversify. Let's spread a couple of them in each country around the world. Now, obviously, we all know that that's wrong. What we respond is quarantine, isolate them. Well, there's a good reason, good mathematics that explains the difference between when diversification works and when quarantine works. But the mathematical models that they were using were models in which diversification worked. They forgot about the implicit assumptions that were underlying the model that made it irrelevant to the world we live in. Let me give you another example that illustrates the point. When we have an electric network, we can use our electric generating capacity more efficiently if we have a larger network. If there's a shortage of electricity in one place in the network, it can supply, having a more integrated network, we can supply electricity to someplace else. But having a more integrated network can raise problems. And we saw that in the United States as we developed a more integrated electric network. A problem in one little town in Ohio caused a surge of electricity that brought down the entire electricity supply in the east coast of the United States. So the whole country, half the country went into darkness. It had some interesting side effects. The birth rate ran up that night, 9 months later. But we learned an important lesson that we need circuit breakers. We need circuit breakers so that if there's a problem in one place, it doesn't spread that problem everywhere else in the world. And that's really what capital account management is about. It's really about saying if the United States is having problems managing its economy, it hasn't figured out how to make sure that increase in money supply goes to where it's needed in the United States and spills over elsewhere, other countries need ways to protect themselves against this surge of liquidity, which can be as destructive as the surge in electricity was in the east coast of the United States. Well, I want to spend the final few minutes of my talk, if I can, discussing where we are. You know, it's a little more than 5 years after the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And we are clearly, in the United States and Europe, not back to health. The United States, we have anemic growth so low that barely creating enough jobs for the new entrants in the labor force. We have 1 out of 7 Americans would like a full-time job, can't get one. We have the highest level of long-term unemployment that we've had in decades. We have the lowest level of labor force participation that we've had. And the only thing that makes us in the United States feel good is that things on the other side of the Atlantic are worse. So that reminds us that, as I say, things could be even worse back at home. We have entered what I call the Great Malaise. At the beginning of the crisis, there were a lot of speeches that people looked at Japan and they saw Japan had its bubble broke in around 1989, and 18, 19 years later, it was still not doing very well. It was stagnation, it was a malaise. And I remember our political leaders saying, we won't make Japan's mistake. And of course then they went ahead and did that. So the question is, why are we having this persistent problem? The diagnosis at the time, in 2008, was a very simple one. Our banks have behaved badly. All that we need to do is put them in the hospital, give them a few $1 trillion and they'll feel better. Once they're repaired, the economy can go on just like it was before, pick up where we left off in 2007 and 8. Maybe even have another bubble.